Hey, Wes here. Thanks for joining me today. Recently, I made this little seed pot and got thinking about it and thought that I would give a big saucer pot a try. This is just basically a seed pot that is on steroids. And because of that, kind of makes it somewhat more difficult. And the problem is the weight of the clay when it's wet wants to sag when you're building these horizontal surfaces. So anyway, I thought I would give it a go and thought that you might be interested. So let's get started. I've already got this thing started, but I thought I would tell you kind of what I did. So I have a pookie here, and it's about 13 inches in diameter, which is plenty big for my purposes. What I did first is I took my clay and I rolled it out, and I use a rolling pin. And then actually I draped it over the top of this other pookie. And so thank you, Jeff, for that suggestion. It worked really well. And then basically I inverted the one pookie over the other one. And so the clay fit into this pretty well. And so I've just kind of evened it off a little bit so far. And also I have let this sit now for at least a half hour, 45 minutes to let it firm up. And that is the key with these things, is, at least for me, it depends on the clay you're using, I guess. You have to let it sit for every once in a while. Otherwise, it will just collapse. Some clay is much stronger than others. And this is medium strong. It's really nice clay to work with. We'll see how well it holds up. Okay, I think I'm going to start putting on coils, and in this case, because of the softness of the clay and because of that kind of horizontal nature, I'm going to make somewhat smaller coils than usual. I just am concerned about the weight of it, and I don't want this thing sagging. Also, I'm not going to be able to make a coil that goes all the way around. It's just too long. I don't have a bench long enough for that anyway. The thing with this is that, one, it takes a lot of clay, takes a lot of time, a lot of materials. It's a bigger issue for firing, obviously. It takes more time to paint. So with these things, it's really quite an investment. And some of them have turned out really nicely, and others have broken, and so that's just kind of the way it is with pottery, I guess. And you can see this is pretty plastic clay. It's really very nice to work with. The question is going to be whether it will hold up and have the wet strength that I want. The other thing that I need to be careful with, this pookie, if you can see it, I made it out of plaster of Paris, and it actually works pretty well, but if those little pieces of plaster break off and get in your clay, I think it would cause spalling. So that's one reason I have this piece of cloth in there, is to protect, put a barrier between the pot and the pookie. One thing I'm careful about, so I keep pushing this in, I do not want a pookie ridge along the edge here. So the size of the pookie is the maximum diameter for this pot. It wouldn't necessarily have to be, but it will make my life easier. One of the challenges here is that it's going to have to stay in the pookie for a while because it's so heavy that if I take it out of the pookie, the whole thing could kind of cave in on itself. All right, the coil is pretty well bonded, so now it's just a matter of slowly pinching this out and expanding that coil. Ideally, it's all about the same thickness. I'm shooting for roughly 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little less. This is a good time to just take your time and not try and make it all happen at one shot. I'm not overly worried about getting the angle or the shape right now. Mostly it's about getting the thickness even. Right, this is mostly thinned out, so the goal here is just to kind of smooth things out a little bit on the outside and on the inside. And you can see it's kind of floppy. So once I'm done with this coil, I'm just going to let it sit for a while. Okay, the first coil is done. You can see that it wants to sag. If I were to put another coil on this right now, it would just cause lots of problems. So what I'm going to do is just cover it up a little bit and walk away for at least an hour, I think, and then come back and see what it looks like. Okay, this actually has been sitting out for 3.5 hours, and it's much more firm. So what I want to do is cut the edge off for two reasons. One, it's so much easier to put the next coil on a straight edge. Also, these edges dry out a little bit, and so I'll get a fresh, a little more moist piece of clay, and it'll stick better. Normally don't wet the edges, but because this has been drying for a while, I want to make sure I get a good bond. So if you lay your coil in the direction that you want the pot to go, so in this case we want the pot to go inward, and so I lay it right along the edge. It has been sitting probably an hour, hour and a half since the last coil, and it's a little bit soft, and I'm kind of running out of time for the day, so I'm just going to call it good for the day. I think that's better anyway, because it'll have time to set up overnight. So the best thing to do is just get a plastic bag, cover it up well, and it'll be fine, and deal with this thing in the morning. It is the next day. This has been sitting, oh, probably 18 hours or so, and it's still pliable, but it's firmed up considerably. So definitely time to put on another coil. All right, I've got the coil on, and the goal here is to try and keep this angle the same all the way around. It's not too bad, a little bit on the wonky side, but not too bad. So I'm just going to add one more coil and then let that set up, and hopefully then finish it off with a last coil for the neck. So let's get that going here. So this is getting to the point where it's difficult to get your hand inside. This will be the last coil where I am able to do that. So you have to smooth it out the best you can with your fingers, and sometimes you can get a smaller scraper on the inside as well. The profile on these saucer pots varied a fair amount. Some of them were almost parallel or horizontal. Others kind of flared up. So I don't know that there was a specific shape that they always used. It doesn't seem that way. Right, I think this is, I want to leave it just as it is for right now. This is a much smaller hole than I need or want. I want it to set up, and then I'll come back, I'll cut out the hole. I want to try and get it as centered and round as I can, and then put a neck on it. So there's no hurry. All right, it's been drying for a while, and it's quite firm actually. So time to just draw out the center and get it cut out and put on the last coil. So for me, this is actually the hardest part because you see these necks on these things, and it's just so easy to tell that they're wonky and uneven. And so I'll just do the best I can. So in this case, I'm putting the coil right on the very top. I'm not building it in anymore. I'm building it up. Pretty sure I've got more clay here than I need. All right, this is day 3, sat overnight. It actually is pretty dry on the top. Underneath, it's not going to be as dry because it didn't get as much ventilation, although the pookie and this cloth is porous, so it's going to dry off some. So the job is to smooth out the top, then flip it out of there and smooth and take care of the bottom. And the bottom's going to have some issues. We know, or I know, that there's going to be some creases in it, so I'm going to have to fill those in and take care of it. A credit card scraper works pretty good for this as well. I like that they're pretty stiff. Cleaning up the rim is the hardest part for me, I think. I have a piece of sandpaper to try and level it off. Now, the clay is pretty soft, so it will foul up the sandpaper. And then use a stone that is the shape of the rim, whatever it is, to smooth it out. Use a flat stone to smooth out the top. Okay, I would say that's good enough. Okay, it's time to deal with the bottom of this thing, and this is kind of a tricky part. Normally you'd flip a pot over upside down and it's fine, but in this case I've got a fairly heavy pot with a narrow rim that's still kind of a little bit soft, and so it cannot support the weight by itself. So I have a box here with foam and it's concave. The idea is to flip this upside down so I can get at the bottom and not put too much pressure on the rim. And so let's flip this upside down. It should pop right out. And now I expect a bunch of creases in this thing. Oh my gosh, it's really pretty good. And it feels reasonably solid. I'm not going to rush it. I'm going to now smooth this out a little bit, and I've got some edges to take care of. There's quite a bit of work to do there too, but so far so good. So you can see there's some seams and cracks and things along the edge. That's to be expected, not a big deal, I don't think. So just wet it down and fill that in with some clay. But most of this is creases from the cloth. Just take pieces of clay and smooth it in there, and I'll smooth it out with a rock. So I've kind of filled it in with clay. Use a stone to start smoothing it out. It'll take some work. This is rough enough. I'm going to probably have to fill in some more gaps with clay. I would say that this is now done, at least the construction part of it. It took part of 3 days, and I don't think I need to do anything more for now, but it needs to dry some. Then I'll slip it, then polish it, and eventually paint it and fire it. So there's lots more to be done, but this turned out pretty much the way I was hoping that it would. I'm happy with it, and I am very happy that you came along too. Grateful for that. If you like this video, thumbs up, and those things are great. And until next time, this is Wes, wishing you health, happiness, peace, and love. Take care. Bye-bye.